I always knew that working in the same company as my husband's friends could lead to unexpected situations, but I never thought it would affect me so personally. Brian and Steve, close friends of Jake, worked in the same department as me. We quickly found common ground, and our professional relationship grew into something more, a friendship. Every day at work, we laughed, shared stories, and spent time together. It became a kind of outlet for me. But everything changed after that corporate event, where the atmosphere was relaxed, and everyone, including me, had a bit too much to drink. It was then that I first felt the strange attraction to Brian and Steve start to take hold of me. I couldn't ignore how they looked at me, how their gazes lingered longer than usual, and how their compliments seemed more personal. Sometime later, during one of the corporate parties which I attended with Jake, I noticed something was happening between me and his friends. Jake, who wasn't a fan of loud events, left early, leaving me in the company of Brian and Steve. That was the moment I allowed myself to give in to my desires. We drank, danced, and the atmosphere gradually heated up. Dancing with Brian and Steve was especially intense. We were close, our hips brushing against each other with every movement. I felt the warmth of their bodies, their touches becoming more intimate. Every time our eyes met, a spark flickered between us. It was a kind of challenge, a game I didn't want to leave. Their hands, gently sliding along my waist, their touches that made my heart race, made me forget everything else. I knew I was playing with fire, but at that moment I didn't care at all. The three of us stayed at the party until late in the evening, and every moment with them only intensified my attraction. I couldn't stop anymore, and I knew that soon this dangerous game would go beyond simple flirting at work. When Jake left, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Left alone with Brian and Steve, I could feel the tension between us growing. We kept drinking, laughing at jokes, and the atmosphere became more relaxed. But with every sip of wine, our conversations grew more candid, and the flirtation that had once been innocent began to cross boundaries. The dancing grew even closer. Brian and Steve pulled me onto the dance floor, and I let them get closer than ever before. Our bodies brushed against each other again, their hands gliding along my waist, my back, lingering just a bit longer than the situation required. I could feel the tension rising, the desires coming to the surface, something inevitable sparking between us. As the night drew to a close, Steve suggested we continue the evening at his place. I hesitated for just a moment. Inside me, two feelings were at war, fear and excitement. But this new, forbidden sensation proved stronger. I agreed, and the three of us headed to Steve's place. The night at his house was a revelation for me. We kept dancing, but now without prying eyes, without barriers. Their touches grew bolder, and I could no longer resist. We ended up in bed together, and what had started as innocent flirtation turned into something much more. I realized that I was drawn to both men, and this feeling was so strong that I couldn't fight it. That night changed everything. I understood that I wanted to continue this relationship, that this connection was more than just fleeting passion. I wanted them both, and this desire became my new reality. A few days had passed since that night, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I was filled with mixed emotions. On one hand, guilt towards Jake, and on the other, an incredible thrill from what had happened. I knew I couldn't go on like this without discussing everything with my husband. Our relationship had always been based on honesty, and I didn't want to destroy that foundation by hiding the truth from him. Gathering my courage, I decided to talk to Jake. When he came home from work, I prepared his favorite dinner, trying to create a relaxing atmosphere for the upcoming conversation. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I didn't know how he would react to my confession, but I knew I had to be honest. After dinner, as we sat in the living room with glasses of wine, I mustered the courage to start talking. I told him about what happened at the party, how I stayed with Brian and Steve, and how it all escalated into a night I couldn't forget. The words were difficult to say, but I tried to be as candid as possible. To my surprise, Jake didn't get angry. He listened to me attentively without interrupting, and his face showed neither anger nor disappointment. When I finished, he calmly asked me how I felt now and what I wanted to do next. It was unexpected. I had anticipated an outburst of anger, shouting, maybe even a threat of divorce, but instead, he suggested we discuss the possibility of an open marriage. I was stunned by his reaction. He seemed so calm and composed, as if this was something completely normal. Inside, I was torn between relief that he wasn't angry and a strange unease at his too calm demeanor. He said that if I truly wanted to continue this relationship, we could establish certain rules and boundaries to maintain our marriage. On the surface, his proposal seemed like a gesture of love and understanding, but something in his voice made me pause. However, at that moment, I was too consumed by my own desires and relief to notice. I agreed to discuss the details, not suspecting that Jake had already begun to craft his devious plan for revenge. He pretended to accept my desires, but in reality, he was already plotting how to use this situation to his advantage. When I told Brian and Steve that Jake had agreed to an open marriage, their reactions were completely unexpected. We met at our usual cafe after work, and I couldn't contain my excitement as I told them about my conversation with Jake. "Are you serious?" Steve frowned, not taking his eyes off me. "He really agreed to this?" "Yes," I replied, still not fully believing it had actually happened. "He was completely calm, even suggested we discuss the rules and boundaries." "That's strange," Brian added, squinting. "I expected him to explode." "So did I admitted, shrugging. "But he didn't even get angry. He just said that if it makes me happy, he's willing to accept it." Brian and Steve exchanged glances, clearly unsure of what to think. Their confusion was obvious, but none of us knew what was really going on in Jake's mind. "So what now?" Steve asked, lowering his voice. "Do you really want to continue this with us?" I nodded, feeling a new fire ignite within me. The possibility of openly seeing both men seemed thrilling. It was something new, something forbidden, but now allowed. "If you're okay with it," I smiled, feeling the tension ease, "I'd like to give it a try." "Well," Brian said, still nodding with some disbelief, "if Jake really agreed, then why not? But honestly, I still can't believe it." "Me neither," Steve added, then looked at me and smiled. "But if this is what you want, Lisa, I'm in." And so, our new life began. I started regularly seeing Brian and Steve, enjoying the freedom that I thought Jake had given me. We spent a lot of time together, and I couldn't help but notice how feelings between us were developing in ways that once seemed impossible. I was consumed by these new relationships, relishing every moment. Sometimes I even brought Brian and Steve home. Jake usually stayed in the other bedroom for the night, giving us the space to be together. His calmness continued to surprise me, but I tried not to dwell on it. However, soon I began to notice that Jake was also taking advantage of our arrangement. He started bringing home girls, and they stayed over for the night. I tried to ignore it, reminding myself that our agreement had to work both ways. But still, jealousy burned inside me. Watching Jake flirt and spend time with other women was painful. I knew it was fair, that I couldn't demand freedom only for myself, but my feelings didn't follow logic. All this time, Jake remained calm, observing my actions from the sidelines. He showed no signs of displeasure, no jealousy. It seemed like he was truly okay with everything. But I had no idea that behind this calm demeanor, something much more sinister was brewing. He was planning every step, preparing for the moment when he could use this entire situation to his advantage. Jake suggested that the four of us spend the weekend at a country house, under the pretense that it would help us all better understand our new relationship. I was surprised by his suggestion, but also intrigued. Brian and Steve agreed without hesitation, and soon we were on our way to a cozy house surrounded by woods. The house was beautiful, spacious, with large windows offering views of nature. Jake took charge of organizing everything, which gave him an added sense of control over the situation. I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of excitement and unease growing inside me, but I tried not to dwell on it. The first evening was peaceful. We sat by the fireplace, talking and laughing, enjoying each other's company. But on the second day, Jake suggested something that caught me completely off guard. How about we try something new? Jake suggested with a sly smile, holding a camera in his hand. I was thinking maybe we could film the three of you having some fun with Lisa. Brian and Steve exchanged glances, clearly unsettled. It was obvious that the suggestion had taken them by surprise. I didn't know how to react either, but something inside me sparked. This idea was forbidden, dangerous, but at the same time thrilling. You want us to do this? On camera? Steve asked, trying to make sense of the situation. Exactly, Jake responded calmly. We're all here for pleasure, aren't we? And why not capture it so we can look back on it and remember? I noticed the tension between us starting to build, but it wasn't an unpleasant feeling. On the contrary, it fueled my desires. I felt excitement rising within me at the thought of it. And you? You'll be participating too? Brian asked hesitantly, still unsure of where this was going. Of course, Jake smiled. We're all participating. This is our game, and it wouldn't be complete if I stayed on the sidelines. For a moment, I froze, trying to grasp what he was suggesting, but then it all clicked. This was a new frontier in our relationship, and to be honest, I started to like the idea. I felt like I was on the brink of something new, something that could completely change our dynamic. Well, I finally spoke, feeling the excitement grow. If everyone's in, let's give it a try. Brian and Steve exchanged looks, and I saw their initial confusion slowly give way to interest. Eventually, they agreed, and Jake, already setting up the camera, joined us. What began as awkward and uncertain interaction quickly evolved into something far more passionate. The three of us simultaneously started doing what we wanted, and I was completely immersed in the moment. Jake also joined in, and his involvement added a whole new dynamic to what was happening. I couldn't hide my pleasure, and the sounds of my enjoyment echoed through the room. The camera captured everything, every moment, every sound. That night became a turning point for all of us. I felt like I had discovered something new, something I had never experienced before. But as it turned out, I was playing by Jake's rules without even realizing it. He got everything he wanted, the evidence he planned to use against me, and his first real victory in this devious game. After our weekend together at the country house, everything seemed more than perfect. I felt like I was the center of attention, getting everything I had ever wanted. Jake continued to play the role of the understanding husband, though at times I found myself wondering if his calm demeanor was a little too perfect, too serene. But I was too engrossed in my new relationships with Brian and Steve to seriously consider anything else. But Jake seemed to know exactly what he was doing. He continued to play his part, letting me believe that everything was going according to plan. Meanwhile, something much darker and more sinister was brewing in his mind. He knew that the video we recorded at the country house would become a powerful tool in his hands. One evening, when I came home, Jake seemed especially calm. He asked me about my day, and we exchanged the usual pleasantries. Nothing gave away his intentions, but soon I would realize what was behind that calm exterior. The next day, while I was at work, I received a notification in my email. The message said that I needed to report to the director's office immediately. My heart raced as I saw that Brian and Steve had received the same message. We didn't know what was happening, but the tension in the air was palpable. When we entered the office, the director greeted us with a cold expression. He silently handed me and my colleagues envelopes. I didn't understand what was happening until I opened mine. Inside was a notice of termination. The reason? Violating the company's policy prohibiting personal relationships between employees. This must be a mistake, I muttered, feeling the world around me crumbling. We received evidence, the director cut me off coldly. A video that clearly shows you violating company rules. I felt the blood drain from my face. The video, the one from the country house. My head spun as I realized what had happened. Jake. It was him. He sent that video to the boss, knowing the consequences would be devastating. Brian and Steve were just as shocked as I was. We left the office in silence, not knowing what to say to each other. Everything we had built collapsed in an instant. And at that moment, I realized that Jake had set his plan for revenge into motion. He was reveling in how his carefully thought-out scheme was coming to life. Jake had been waiting for this moment, and now that the first phase of his revenge was complete, he was savoring his victory. I was left with a ruined career, and the realization that my naivety and desire for freedom had led to disaster. When I came home after that dreadful day when I was fired, everything felt unreal. I felt empty, as if everything I had ever known had collapsed in an instant. My job, my relationships with Brian and Steve, none of it mattered anymore. I had lost something much more important, myself. The door to the house was slightly ajar, and inside there was an unusual silence. The first thing that struck me was Jake's absence. He was usually home, always greeting me, but this time something was wrong. I walked down the hallway, peeking into every room, and suddenly realized that his things were gone. All his belongings, clothes, shoes, personal items, had disappeared. On the kitchen table lay a single note. With trembling hands, I picked it up and began to read. "Lisa, I thought I could handle this, but it was a lie. I can't look at you anymore and pretend everything is okay. Your freedom has cost me too much. Goodbye." The world around me crumbled. Jake was gone, leaving me completely alone. I couldn't believe it. I knew our relationship had changed, but I never thought it would end like this. How could I have been so blind? How could I have not seen that I was losing the most important thing, the love and support of the person who had always been by my side? I tried to find him. I called him, sent messages, even tried to contact his friends and colleagues, but it was all in vain. Jake had disappeared from my life without a trace. Every minute I waited for him to come back, thinking this was just a temporary impulse, but days passed, and he didn't return. I sat in our empty house, feeling completely lost. I had gotten the freedom I thought I wanted, but the price was too high. Without Jake, I realized how empty and meaningless my new life was. Everything that had once seemed important now felt insignificant. I had traded love for fleeting pleasures, and now I was left alone, having lost everything that mattered. This freedom turned out to be an illusion. It promised me something more, but in the end, it took away everything I loved. Now I was left in complete confusion, not knowing how to move forward. The days after Jake's departure dragged on slowly and painfully. Every time I woke up in an empty bed, I realized that the life I once knew was gone. My career was shattered, and all my dreams of professional success had crumbled into dust. I couldn't face going back to work, not just because I had been fired, but because I was humiliated, stripped of respect and self-worth. The mere thought of facing my former colleagues made me shudder with shame. My personal life also began to fall apart. Brian and Steve, the very people with whom I had built such dangerous and passionate relationships, started to distance themselves from me. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it, thinking it was just a temporary reaction to the stress and pressure we were all under, but soon it became clear that they were deliberately avoiding me. Every interaction with them became tense and uncomfortable. Where there had once been jokes and easy conversation, there was now silence and awkward glances. One day, when I suggested we meet up, they declined, citing busy schedules. But I could see there was more to it than that. They were beginning to realize that our relationship had led to disaster, ruining not only their lives but mine as well. I was left alone. The realization of this hit me with renewed force every day. I had lost not only Jake, but also those who had seemed close to me. I had fallen into the trap that Jake had set with such cold precision. Now I was locked in this cage, deprived of everything that had ever mattered. In moments of despair, I tried to figure out if there was any way to undo what had been done. How could I fix the mistakes that had led to such devastating consequences? I thought about reaching out to Jake, explaining that I had come to my senses, asking for his forgiveness. But each time I realized that his disappearance was no accident. Jake was gone, and with him went any chance of salvaging our relationship. Instead, I was left alone with my thoughts, surrounded by silence and emptiness. My pursuit of freedom had turned into complete isolation. I thought I could have it all, but in the end, I lost more than I could have imagined. A growing sense of despair took hold of me, and I didn't know if I would ever find a way out of this darkness. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the emptiness inside me only grew stronger. I could no longer ignore the fact that losing Jake was the worst thing that could have happened to me. My life, which once seemed so full, had been emptied. Without Jake, nothing made sense. I knew I had to do something to try to get him back. I sat down at the table and started writing a letter. It needed to be simple and honest, without any embellishments or excuses. Jake, I made a terrible mistake, and I know I hurt you. I'm so sorry. I understand that I may never deserve your forgiveness, but if there's any chance you could give me another chance, please let me try. Lisa. I sealed the letter and sent it. Days passed, then weeks, but there was no response. I waited every day, checking the mail, my phone, but Jake remained completely silent. Every night I went to bed thinking that maybe tomorrow he would reply, but each morning I woke up to the realization that nothing had changed. I tried reaching out to his friends, but no one knew where he was. Jake seemed to have vanished off the face of the earth, leaving me in complete uncertainty. All my attempts to get him back were in vain. He ignored me as if I no longer existed for him. My life became one of waiting. Waiting that brought nothing but pain. I realized that I had lost him forever, and with that realization came a sense of utter helplessness. I was left alone in this silence, not knowing how to go on. Several months passed, and I finally came to terms with the fact that Jake was gone for good. Time didn't heal the wounds. It only helped me realize that losing him was the inevitable consequence of my own mistakes. I stopped searching for him, understanding that my attempts to win him back were futile. Brian and Steve, who had lingered in my life for a while, eventually faded away as well. They stopped reaching out, and one day I realized that I no longer waited for their calls or messages. The period when I thought I could have it all was an illusion, and my actions had led to complete isolation. With no job and no one left who had once been close to me, I faced a harsh reality. My pursuit of new experiences had destroyed everything that mattered in my life. Now I had to start over, but without the people I had lost due to my own decisions. These months taught me a lot. I realized that you can't sacrifice stability and trust for fleeting pleasures. I was left alone, but this solitude gave me the opportunity to rethink my life. I knew I would start over, but I would do things differently, understanding that the most important things in life aren't the momentary thrills, but the connections we build with others. Connections that require respect, trust, and love.